The year is 390 BC. The pre-empire city of Rome, now a smoldering ruin, lies at the mercy of a brutal enemy. The Gauls, fierce warriors from the north, have stormed the gates, and the town center of the Roman Republic is burning. The stone streets are filled with the cries of the fallen and little remains of the Roman legions. On the Capitoline Hill, the last of the Roman resistance huddled together, a small group of soldiers and senators, weary and starving. The night is heavy with the stench of smoke and war. Would this be the end of Rome before it had barely begun? Below them, the Gaulish chieftain Brennus stands victorious, his eyes gleaming with ruthless ambition. As a final attempt to negotiate, the Romans gather what little gold they have left, hoping to buy their survival. Brennus watches, a cruel smile playing on his lips. As the gold is weighed, he throws his heavy iron sword onto the scales. Vae victis, he sneers, woe to the vanquished. The message is clear. Even in surrender, Rome will not survive the day. But just as all hope seems lost, a distant sound breaks the silence. Thunderous hoofbeats, growing louder with each passing moment. The defenders on the hill strain to see through the darkness. And then, out of the shadows, he appears. Marcus Furius Camillus, the exiled general, riding at the head of a small but determined force. His eyes blaze as he raises his sword, rallying his men for one final, desperate charge. Camillus has returned to Rome, and with him, the last hope of the Republic. In the shadow of 7 hills, a city was finding its destiny. Rome, in the early 5th century BC, was in its infancy, a young republic brimming with ambition, yet vulnerable to the surrounding threats. Enemies encircled the city, and survival was never guaranteed. It was into this world of constant peril that Marcus Furius Camillus was born, a descendant of the noble Furia family, destined to etch his name into the annals of history. At the time, Rome was a city perpetually preparing for war. Children's games mirrored battle formations, and bedtime stories were filled with tales of ancestral glory. Even in his youth, Camillus displayed a natural leadership and a thirst for adventure. As he grew, so did his understanding of what it truly meant to be Roman. The values of the Republic weren't just lofty ideals preached by stern-faced elders, they were the very lifeblood of the city. Duty wasn't a burden, but a badge of honor. Discipline wasn't punishment, but the key to greatness. And the common good? It was the thread that bound every Roman heart, from the humblest plebeian to the most exalted patrician. These principles shaped Camillus, molding him like clay. He would become the embodiment of what it meant to be a proud Roman. In Rome, war was a way of life. Men either defended their borders or subdued threats. Military conquest was the path to honor, the way a man made a name for himself and his family. It was the siege of Veii, where Camillus would prove himself on the battlefield. 10 long years of frustration and bloodshed had left Rome exhausted, its spirit battered. The Etruscans, their fiercest rivals, seemed on the brink of victory. The Roman Senate, desperate for a strong leader to rebuild and restore the Republic, turned to Camillus. They entrusted him with the mantle of dictator, a position of absolute power in times of crisis, one he would hold 5 times. Camillus didn't just accept this role, he seized it with unwavering resolve and decisiveness, and he wasted no time in taking action. Camillus devised a daring plan to tunnel beneath Veii's defenses, leading the Romans to a hard-fought and decisive victory. His leadership on the battlefield would soon become the stuff of legend. Camillus's triumph at Veii was nothing short of monumental. He returned to Rome a hero, celebrated by the people and lauded by the Senate. His victory had not only expanded Rome's territory but also secured its future. The spoils of Veii poured into the city, filling its coffers and feeding its ambitions. But in the shadow of this triumph, envy began to fester. The same senators who had once praised Camillus now whispered behind closed doors. They accused him of taking too much of Veii's riches for himself, of growing too powerful, too quickly. The victories that had elevated him in the eyes of the public now made him a target for those who feared his influence. Rumors spread like wildfire. His opponents painted him as arrogant, as a man who put his own glory above the good of the Republic. The people, swayed by these whispers, began to question the man they had once revered. It wasn't long before the Senate, driven by jealousy and fear, sought to curb his power. They accused him of embezzlement, of keeping spoils that should have gone to the state. The charges were baseless, a thinly veiled attempt to bring down a man who had become too prominent, too influential for their liking. Camillus was shocked by the betrayal. This was the city he had devoted his life to, the people he had fought to protect. But rather than plunge Rome into civil strife, rather than see the city he loved torn apart by internal conflict, Camillus made a painful decision. He chose exile. Leaving behind the city he had saved, Camillus retreated to Ardea, a quiet town far from the political machinations of Rome. Gone were the marble halls and bustling forums, replaced by the gentle rhythms of rural life. In Ardea, he lived a life of quiet solitude, far from the intrigue and ambition that had come to define his years in Rome. But the peace of Ardea was a double-edged sword. Did Camillus find solace in the simplicity of rural life? Perhaps, but one can imagine the loneliness that crept into his heart, the sense of betrayal that lingered. Each day must have felt like a dagger, twisting with every thought of the city he had left behind, the city that had turned its back on him. Yet even in exile, Camillus never lost his love for Rome. He watched from afar as the city faced new challenges, his heart heavy with the knowledge that he could do nothing to help. The distance did nothing to diminish his sense of duty, his unwavering commitment to the Republic. And then the unthinkable happened. The Gauls, a fierce and relentless enemy, swept down from the north like an unstoppable tide. They crushed the Roman army at the Battle of the Allia, leaving the city defenseless. Rome, the city Camillus had fought so hard to protect, was sacked, its streets burned, its people slaughtered. Only the Capitoline Hill remained, held by a small band of desperate defenders. As word of Rome's plight reached him in Ardea, Camillus knew what he had to do. The city that had exiled him, that had betrayed him, was now on the brink of annihilation. And despite the bitterness, despite the betrayal, he could not stand by and watch Rome fall. Rome needed him. The very people who had cast him out now prayed for his return, and return he did. Camillus began gathering what forces he could from the nearby towns and villages. It was a makeshift army, farmers, merchants, and soldiers who had survived the Gauls' onslaught. They weren't seasoned warriors, but they were driven by the same desperation that fueled Camillus, the need to save their homeland from total destruction. As Camillus marched toward Rome, his heart must have been a storm of emotions. He had been betrayed, exiled, and forgotten by the city he loved. But as the columns of smoke rose on the horizon, all that mattered was the survival of Rome. With every step, he felt the weight of the city's fate on his shoulders. When he finally reached Rome, the sight was devastating. The once proud city was a smoldering ruin, its streets littered with the debris of war, its people either dead or in hiding. But there, on the Capitoline Hill, a small group of defenders still held out, Rome's last bastion of hope. Camillus knew there was no time to waste. He gathered his forces and launched a counterattack with the precision and determination that had made him a historic commander 2,000 years later. The Gauls, confident in their conquest, were caught off guard by the sudden ferocity of the Roman counteroffensive. But Camillus understood that sheer force alone would not be enough. He needed to outmaneuver the Gauls, to exploit their weaknesses. Using his knowledge of the terrain and his tactical brilliance, he devised a plan to strike the Gauls where they least expected it. Camillus's strategy was twofold: to draw the Gauls into a false sense of security, and then to strike decisively when their guard was down. He ordered small, calculated skirmishes to harass the Gauls, keeping them on edge, and then retreated, luring them into a trap. The Gauls, eager to crush the remaining resistance, took the bait. And then, when the time was right, Camillus unleashed his full force. In a brilliantly coordinated attack, he led his troops from the front, charging into the heart of the Gaulish forces. The defenders on the Capitoline Hill, inspired by the sight of their former leader, rallied and joined the fight, adding to the chaos within the Gaulish ranks. The battle was fierce and brutal. But Camillus's leadership and the determination of his makeshift army turned the tide. The Gauls, who had once seemed invincible, began to falter. They were not prepared for the relentless, coordinated assault that Camillus had planned so meticulously. In the final moments of the battle, Camillus led a daring assault on the Gaulish camp itself. With the Gauls now divided and disoriented, the Romans cut through their defenses like a blade. Panic spread among the Gauls as they realized their stronghold was no longer secure. The momentum shifted entirely, and what began as a fight for survival became a rout. By the end of the day, the Gauls were in full retreat. Their invasion, which had brought Rome to the brink of extinction, was repelled. The city was saved, not by the Senate or the people, but by the man they had once cast out, Marcus Furius Camillus. Rome was battered, its walls scarred, and its people shaken, but it was still standing. And it was Camillus who had delivered it from destruction. His return was not just a military victory, it was a profound moment of redemption. In the aftermath, Camillus was hailed as the second founder of Rome. He had not only defended the city, but had rekindled the spirit of the Republic. The same Senate that had once exiled him now welcomed him back with open arms, recognizing that Rome's survival was owed to his unwavering loyalty and unmatched leadership. The story of Camillus's return and victory over the Gauls is a testament to the strength of character, the power of resilience, and the enduring bond between a leader and his city. Even in exile, even in the face of betrayal, Camillus had never stopped being Roman. And when Rome needed him most, he was there, ready to save the city he had always called home.